Get ready to experience a world filled with anthropomorphic animals, money-growing trees, and the world's most adorable loan shark. The Animal Crossing series has taken the world by storm, becoming the second best-selling game on the Nintendo Switch, and the best-selling game of all time in Japan, even surpassing the original Mario Bros. But have you ever wondered how this franchise, originally produced for an underperforming console, became one of Nintendo's most beloved and recognizable IPs? This is the story of Animal Crossing, Wild World, and City Folk. It was the best of times. It was the GameCube undersold during its respective console generation, and now Nintendo is no longer the top dog in the gaming market of times. In fact, it hadn't been for a long time. Despite this, Nintendo was riding off of the mild success of the popularity of some of its latest franchises. Amongst their new IPs, the Animal Crossing series stood out as particularly successful with its initial launch in the West on the GameCube back in 2002. It did decently well, eventually selling just over 2.71 million copies worldwide. However, in 2004, the Animal Crossing franchise was not as well known in America as it was in other regions. This was because, up until now, the franchise had only had one release in America, as the first Japanese-only release, known as Animal Forest, was initially planned for the Nintendo 64 disc drive, which saw various delays, taking it from its initial launch in Japan, planned in 1997, all the way up to 1999, and eventually saw its release cancelled for the West. From there, Nintendo released a version of Animal Forest called Animal Forest Plus for the GameCube, which utilized the GameCube's hardware to keep track of time rather than using a built-in battery inside of the 64's cartridge, and added new content such as a museum and new villagers. The copy of the game the West did see, Animal Crossing, or as it is affectionately referred to by its tagline, Population Growing, was essentially a localized re-release of Animal Forest Plus with added content, such as support for e-reader cards. Nintendo was so impressed with this release that they decided to release a new version of this game over in Japan, with new bonus content, such as access to a new island and even more new villagers called Animal Forest E+. And that is why this series was not as well known in the West in 2004. During this time, there were rumors that a sequel to Animal Crossing Population Growing was being developed for the GameCube. However, a surface-level dive leads me to believe that some people online merely confused an interview with Shigeru Miyamoto about the Japanese-only Animal Forest E+ for the GameCube as being about Animal Crossing 2. Even so, it is entirely possible that Animal Crossing 2 was at one point a real game in development, but it was likely scrapped or modified to work on a potentially newer console, or perhaps even a certain handheld that was right around the corner. During E3 of 2004, Nintendo made the exciting announcement that a new Animal Crossing title, tentatively named Animal Crossing DS, was in production. And oh boy, was it an exciting time to be a Nintendo fan. I mean, just look at this prototype Nintendo DS from the early launch trailer. It's like someone took a regular DS and fed it 10,000 burgers. Thankfully, the final version was a little bit more streamlined, but can you imagine if this monstrosity had actually hit the market? The Nintendo DS was launched on November 21st, 2004 in North America, followed promptly by December release in Japan, as well as globally by the end of Q1 next year. And Nintendo promised that it wouldn't replace the Game Boy Advanced. They lied. On November 23rd, 2005, Oideyo Dobutsu no Mori, aka Animal Forest Come Here, was released in Japan. It was promptly followed by December release in North America and Australia under the name Welcome to Animal Crossing Wild World. Europe ate shit though. As far as localizations go, this was an outstanding turnaround time. But this was no mistake. Perhaps because they had already learned their lesson with Animal Crossing Population Growing. This time around, Nintendo developer Katsuya Eguchi chose to lead the Animal Crossing team in a direction that would result in very minimal localization changes needing to occur. Unfortunately, this localization process resulted in the loss of some of Animal Crossing's original Japanese identity, a fact that most average fans are probably unaware of. Things that were changed included region-exclusive holidays, as well as fish, bugs, and localized species changes. These are all normal things that are often changed when localizers adapt a game for another region. However, this time around, it was not only the Japanese content that had been cut. In an effort to appeal to a global audience, certain holidays, such as those based on Halloween and Christmas, were removed in an attempt to make the game more globally friendly. This decision was understandably met with criticism from fans and critics alike, with some claiming that by appealing to a global audience, Nintendo created a game devoid of cultural flavor. The decision to remove certain holidays would later be rectified immediately with the franchise's newer releases. But it was official. Animal Crossing Wild World was released to the public, and the response was nothing short of astounding. In just 4 months after its release, the game had already sold a staggering 2.5 million copies in Japan alone, far surpassing the initial sales projections of 400,000 to 500,000 copies. This success continued, with the game eventually selling a total of 11.75 million copies, earning it a spot as the 9th best-selling game in the Nintendo DS of all time. Not too shabby for a sequel in a relatively new franchise, huh? Make no mistake, Animal Crossing for the Nintendo GameCube sold well for the GameCube. But consider that for Nintendo, the GameCube was one of the company's lowest points financially. But why was this? During its console generation, the GameCube was put in an awkward spot. It wasn't the most powerful console, but that title went to the Xbox. And it wasn't a platform that third-party developers were eager to develop for either, as the PlayStation 2 saw the most releases of any console released that gen. You see, for the GameCube, Nintendo chose to go for proprietary disc design that was smaller than that of the average CD, unlike the PS2 and Xbox. As for why, Nintendo likely chose to go with this design to combat piracy. However, the GameCube discs only held 1.4 gigabytes of data, while the PS2 discs held a maximum of 4.3 gigabytes. This new form factor also meant Nintendo couldn't market the GameCube as a console that could play DVDs, at least not most GameCubes, as Nintendo did eventually release the Panasonic Q, a GameCube created in collaboration with Panasonic that had DVD playback capabilities. It was released in Japan only, and really, it was more of a GameCube and DVD player duct taped together. Ultimately, these restrictions made the GameCube platform a less desirable platform to develop for, and as a result, it had a smaller library of third-party releases and relied heavily on its first-party titles, which were great, mind you, but as we all know, a console lives and dies by its selection of overall games, not just its first-party offerings. Listen, I have a great deal of affection for the GameCube with its cube-shaped shape and its gameplay and capabilities, but this isn't 2004 anymore, it's 2005. Times change, man! And this was on the rise. And it just so happens that the format of a game like Animal Crossing benefits amazingly from being put on a handheld. Think about it. Perhaps one of the main reasons that Animal Crossing Wild World sold so well compared to its GameCube predecessor was because being on a handheld console allowed players to interact with the game more. You could go out and explore the town, meet the locals, get new items, and more, all within the palm of your hand. On a console, like the GameCube, the player is more likely to be stationary and not be able to move around as much. This limits the amount of total interactions the player can have with the game. As for the GameCube, you could take this thing to little Timmy's house, but are you really going to? It even has a little handle and everything. Another reason could be that the portability, and eventually, popularity of the handheld allowed for more people to play the game. This created a sense of community and helped increase interest in the game, because who doesn't love a good sense of community and increased interest in the game? I mean, it's not like anyone would actually prefer to play a game alone in their room or anything. Console games can often be played by one person at a time, unless you opt for split-screen play. While this can still be enjoyable, it's not quite the same as everyone being able to share the same experience without compromise. On the other hand, handhelds like the Nintendo DS allow for more flexibility and the possibility of playing with others, which can enhance the overall enjoyment of the game. Ultimately, I think a lot of the success came down to Animal Crossing being the exact intersection between a casual game that everyone could enjoy, as well as being one of the first big franchises to have a major release on Nintendo DS, which, unbeknownst to people in the year 2005, would go on to print buckets of money for Nintendo with how well it did. But just what was it about the contents of this tiny little cartridge that made it such a hot commodity? Like every other good story, ours begins in a dark, stormy night, inside of a taxi, being driven by a Kappa. This particular Kappa is named Captain, a returning character from the first game in the series, who used to pilot a boat. Really was more of a dinghy. Well, this time around, Captain has moved on from piloting dinghies to piloting taxis and starring in intros to games. Once you've told him your name, Captain asks you where you're headed. You see, Animal Crossing is a game that allows players to live in a virtual world filled with a colorful cast of talking animals, and the promise of being able to one day own your very own home. You can pretty much do whatever you please, so long as it fits within the confinements of a family-friendly first-party title developed by Nintendo, famous creator of family-friendly first-party titles. You can get away with quite a lot, actually. Once you pick the name, Captain asks you more nosy questions, of which the answers determine what your character will look like. Before you know it, the taxi will be pulling up to a mostly barren landscape that you'll eventually call home. But first, we find ourselves in a familiar predicament for any Animal Crossing player. Broke and homeless. Thankfully, a duck inside of Town Hall tells us that a mysterious third party has prepared a home for us. So, We go check it out, and are stopped by some guy on our way out. Enter Tom Nook, the charming, coercive proprietor of this fine establishment. Perhaps because we are too poor to say no, and too new in town to know better, Tom Nook offers us a part-time job working at his shop, where we can pay off our loan, bit by bit. We go to Tom Nook's store, and get changed into only the finest of work attires. Then, Tom Nook has us do a few errands for him. Our employment lasts a grand total of 30 minutes, but it was nice while it lasted. At this point, Tom Nook basically tells us to scram and sell whatever shit we find on the floor to pay off our mortgage, which he basically forces upon us. So, we're once again left to fend for ourselves in the crazy, wild world of Animal Crossing. This is where the fun begins. It's time to finally start crossing some animals. Of which, there are many, but by now, you've probably met everyone in town. If it doesn't seem like a lot of residents, this is because new villagers will move in every day until your town is full. In this game, the number of villagers you're going to have in your town maxes out at 8. When it comes to the townsfolk, they are an excellent source of entertainment, if not money. This time around, Wild World introduced a new villager species, monkey. However, this comes at the loss of 170 fewer villagers when compared to the Japanese-only Animal Forest E+, and 68 less than Animal Crossing for the GameCube. It also comes at the loss of all but one hippo villager. But don't worry, they all still have that classic Animal Crossing witty charm. The villagers in Animal Crossing Wild World have all the same personality types as the ones in Population Growing. Every villager can be categorized based on one of 6 personalities, based on their gender. We have lazy, jock, and cranky for male villagers, and normal, peppy, and snooty for female villagers respectively. A fan favorite element of the first game for many fans is that the villagers in that game are rude. While I wouldn't say that the villagers in Animal Crossing Wild World are quite as rude as the ones in Population Growing, they do have a bit of sass to them. Obviously, the cranky and snooty villagers tend to be more rude when compared to others, but even the normal and jock ones can be a little bit mean sometimes. They're just human after all. Or animal. Personally, this is one of my favorite aspects of this, as well as most older Animal Crossing games. Unlike newer games, villagers don't just immediately love you. Some villagers will need time put into building your relationship with them before they warm up to you, if ever. And even then, you could be best friends with some villager, and they could always just get up and leave without even asking you for permission or anything. Yeah, Animal Crossing was pretty hardcore back then. I could go on in my whole back in my day shtick, but simply put, I think that the fact villagers don't just suck up to you, and that you actually need to put in effort before they like you, adds a sense of realism. Well, as realistic as a world filled with anthropomorphic talking animals can be. Unlike a game like, say, Harvest Moon, I find that the dialogue in older Animal Crossing games manages to strike a balance between being witty and feeling non-repetitive. In fact, a lot of the dialogue can be just out there, but there isn't a lot of repetition, at least not compared to other social simulation games at the time. While in Harvest Moon, or at least a few Harvest Moon games I've played, if you really get to know someone, you quickly run into a metaphorical wall of them just repeating the exact same text day in and day out, which, ironically, serves as a sort of punishment for getting to know someone. Overall, that's less of a problem in Wild World. Partially because, unlike Harvest Moon, there is no option to romance the villagers in Wild World, and partially because it seems like Animal Crossing villagers are always on some new bullshit. On top of that, because of the nature of Animal Crossing, no two towns will be exactly the same. Even if you have the same villagers as someone else, there is no guarantee that they will act the same way, other than acting according to the parameters of the personality type. They could have different catchphrases, choose to wear different clothes, or even engage in different hobbies, which we will get to later. Of course, it's not all sunshine and rainbows. Some people really dislike the overly friendly and cute style of the games in the series, but to me, that's part of the charm. Because there's nothing quite like being talked down to by a cute animal in a game that's supposed to be cozy and friendly. Maybe it's not so much that the villagers in Wild World are realistic, so much as they feel like distinct, well-rounded characters. Not because they can tend to be rude, but in spite of it. After all, could you imagine if villagers actually just said or did whatever you wanted them to do, and had no distinct personality of their own? Because the map in Animal Crossing Wild World is smaller than that of the first entry, you will see a lot more of the animals, and have a lot more interactions with them this time around. However, new to Wild World are hobbies, which are pastimes that individual villagers do in order to pass the time. Just like in real life, the hobbies a villager is currently interested in constantly change, and this can affect how your interactions with them will go. Hobbies include bug catching, furniture collecting, shell collecting, talking about food, fishing, gardening, shopping for clothes, and simply just walking around. Wild World focuses less on having the player do favors for the animals, and more on highlighting the unique hobbies and likes of each individual villager. Villagers will still give you tasks, you just need to get the right interactions with them in order to activate them. Luckily, Animal Crossing Wild World makes up for this by being full of new surprises and adventures every day. For example, on Monday, you might discover a secret club filled with smuggled goods. And on Tuesday, you might meet a new resident who needs a warm welcome, or even a shady otter trying to scam you. And on Wednesday, we meet a squirrel that needs evicting. Indeed, every day brings new opportunities in the world of Animal Crossing. But as you embark on your journey through this magical world full of talking anthropomorphic animals, it's important to remember that you'll need money to make the most of your adventures. Adventuring don't come cheap, you know? In order to make money, one needs to find the best items. And to find the best items, it is important to pay close attention to your environment, which changes in real time according to the season. For example, if it's winter, it will snow. And if it's April, there may be April showers, which may lead to May flowers, which ultimately might lead to you making a pretty penny. You salsa flowers. Players can find all sorts of interesting items while exploring their town. You can shake trees to find fruit and furniture, scour the beach for shells and sea creatures, or poke around the lost and found for lost items. Some friendly villagers may even gift you items, making them a potential source of income. Remember this. Speaking of neighbors, here are some of the new special NPCs added to Wild World. Celeste, the sister of Blathers, who runs the museum's observatory. She lets you use her telescope to look up at constellations, which can be drawn in using the DS's touchscreen. Rooster, a pigeon who runs the Roost, a local cafe located in the museum's basement. This guy gives you coffee and a nice place to chill. Just don't expect him to talk back. He's way too cool for that. Thanks to the fact that they removed the mandatory Viking helmet from the first game, we have Harriet, the poodle that runs Shampoodle, a salon where players can get a haircut, and eventually, even experimental hairstyles of the opposite gender. Shampoodle can be found on the final upgrade of Tom Nook's store, which requires having the player invite a friend to come over from another town and purchase something at Nook's. Dr. Shrunk, an axolotl that teaches the player emotions and feelings from Monday through Friday, between 6 a.m. and midnight. Lyle, a slippery otter who's up to his whiskers in insurance fraud. He also appears to be working alongside Red. Caitlin, a cat mom on a mission. She's searching for her lost daughter, Katie. Unfortunately for Katie, you won't be able to run into Caitlin anymore, since Nintendo pulled the plug on their Wi-Fi connection service back in 2014. But hey, at least you can still lend her a hand when visiting a friend's town through local DS wireless connection. Pascal, a red otter that pops up in your river on weekdays and gives you new furniture if you're willing to listen to his deep thoughts about life, such as, the more you learn, man, the less you know, as well as returning favors, such as Gulliver, who has now moved on to piloting flying saucers. Pretty much every major NPC from the first game is back, actually. But if you want to find out more about them, I recommend checking out my video, The Story of Animal Crossing, Population Growing. Link in the description. Once you make enough money to pay off your loan, your goals are basically up to you. For example, Person A might decide that they want to have the best house and the most money, while Person B might decide to speedrun the game and reset or time travel around to fill up their entire catalog, of which there are now 16 new fish and 16 new bugs to collect in the game, compared to the GameCube version. Both choices are valid in the world of Animal Crossing. Well, except for the time travel part. That's not really allowed, but I won't tell if you don't. However, if you do time travel, you're greeted by everyone's favorite Animal Crossing character. Emotional trauma. Mr. Rossetti here is the lovely mole that pops up when he catches you resetting the game. Rossetti will make you apologize for resetting the game if he catches you. And his antics involve doing things such as having the player type an apology on the spot, to having them quantify the exact amount of how sorry they are. Yeah, he's pretty unpleasant, and whenever I cheat in my children's video game, I try to make it one of my goals to not meet him. However, I do have to admit, he is pretty in line with this game's theme of rude animals, so I'll let it slide. Tangible goals, however, would be things like filling up the museum, getting your house fully upgraded, collecting every song in the game, or maxing out your bank account. But make no mistake, there is no one true goal you need to achieve in order to beat the game, because there really is no one true goal to beat, and no set order to do it in. Some might argue that a game ends when the credits roll, but if that's the case, then you could beat Animal Crossing Wild World on the first day that KK Slider shows up in your town, and you might still have one of the beginner houses, and an empty museum by that point. For the most part, the Animal Crossing games revolve around the player performing mundane, everyday tasks, such as, well, doing mundane tasks for animals you like, or even animals you might dislike. The gameplay loop is set up in a way where you have a limited amount of daily tasks to check in on. And cheating in order to do these events faster is discouraged, due to the game being tied to your DS's clock and calendar, and resetting, forcing a misguided lecture from a talking mole on you. What I'm getting at here is that Animal Crossing is a game about slowing down and enjoying little moments for what they are, and to that end, there is no end. Like every Animal Crossing title, Wild World runs in real time. The first game was even marketed as a game that plays every minute of every day, whether you're playing or not. Being on the Nintendo DS, this was the first entry in the series to utilize the touchscreen to allow players to create custom designs for clothing and tiles that you could place on the ground, although the pixels you had to work with were limited, to say the least. In addition, the touchscreen serves as one of the main control schemes of this game. Use it to move around, talk to villagers, make clothing designs, and click on the items in your inventory, which happens a lot, actually. Look, this is way easier than this. Another one of the new features of the Nintendo DS that was first introduced to this franchise in Wild World was the ability to visit other players' towns via the use of the now discontinued Nintendo Wi-Fi connection service. This was a groundbreaking feature at the time, as it allowed players to interact with others all around the world. In fact, this game has the distinction of being the second game after Mario Kart DS to take advantage of Nintendo's Wi-Fi connection service. Speaking of wireless connections, this game also utilized the local wireless feature of the Nintendo DS in order to offer demos and special items through Nintendo DS download stations at certain stores. Aside from hacking, these stations were the only legitimate way to obtain monkey villagers. However, the DS download stations were eventually discontinued by Nintendo, making certain content permanently inaccessible. But a little hacking never hurt anyone, right? Speaking of monkeys being permanently taken out of the game, they fired Porter. He is gone, but not forgotten. But he has been replaced his entirety by Cap'n in the intro, and trains are no longer present in the town. Let's talk about the home for a bit. In Wild World, house upgrades are forced upon you by Tom Nook immediately after you have paid off your last mortgage. Unlike previous installments, Wild World only had one house that players had to share. You know what that means? Roommates. In addition, the house now has 5 rooms total, versus the 3 in population growing. The overall size of the house has increased from 164 squares on the GameCube to 208 squares on the DS. But remember that this space is shared with potential roommates. There are also now 96 slots for storage in dressers and wardrobes, which is up from a measly 3 in the GameCube version. I cannot overstate how much of a massive upgrade this was. Between this and the bigger home, there is now so much room for activities inside of players' houses, as well as a number of lovely furniture sets from the past games, and new ones too, such as a DLC-only Nintendo set. However, one thing that I felt was really missing in Animal Crossing Wild World was the ability to collect and play classic Nintendo Entertainment System games. In the previous Animal Crossing game for the GameCube, players could collect NES cartridges that served as both furniture and fully playable games that could be used inside the in-game home. However, in an interview, series director Katsuya Eguchi explained that the NES games were removed from Animal Crossing Wild World so that players could focus more on the adventure aspect of living in the Animal Crossing world. While I understand the reasoning behind this decision, I think in reality it was a bit of a cop-out, and that the games were probably removed to keep the size of the game small. Personally, I think it would have been really cool for players to be able to experience some of their favorite old Nintendo games in a new way. Or for younger players who may not have grown up with them to experience them for the first time. Ultimately, these in-game emulators would never return to the series. Of course, this was just one of my minor complaints while playing the game. Most of the new features in Animal Crossing Wild World added something fresh to the experience. As far as some quality of life changes go, here are a few. The color of the roof of your house can now no longer be randomly painted by villagers. The wishing wheel and town dump are now missing. The functionality of them has instead been moved to the town hall. Blathers has earned his license to assess fossils, so that players can appraise and submit missing ones to him all within the same day and interaction, instead of having to wait a couple of days to send them off to be appraised and then donated. KK Slider now plays his tunes inside of the roost on Saturdays. This implies he's likely moving up in the world. Good for him. Flowers and trees can now be planted on any plot of land, as long as it has enough surrounding space and is not near a house or river. This is an upgrade from Population Growing's tree growing system, where some tiles simply just couldn't grow trees. Villagers can now be asked not to move out, but doing so will change their hobby. This only works if the player has high friendship with them. Holidays have been removed and replaced with events that happen monthly, or even bi-monthly, such as a yard sale, where villagers come to your house and offer to buy your furniture from you, or Lottie Day, a day where villagers come up with new town tunes. And finally, for perhaps the biggest feature of all, you no longer have to wear that dumb hat from the GameCube games. All these new updates and new features were widely appreciated by fans so much that they helped pave the way for the release of a sequel. The sequel, we would soon find out, has a lot in common with its predecessor. It was a time of great prosperity and success, but also a time of struggle and challenges. The GameCube, a console in which the Animal Crossing franchise had released 2 games in Japan and 1 in the West, had unfortunately underperformed during its generation, and Nintendo was no longer the dominant force in the gaming market that it once was. Wait, I feel like we've been here before. I feel like we've done all this before. It's almost like this is the second time this is all happening. Mean Animal Crossing City folk. Yes, that's right. Animal Crossing City Folk is the second time this is all happening. And no, you're not crazy. It's true. Animal Crossing City Folk is the second time this is all happening. And if you feel like you've been here before, it's probably because you have. Let me explain. Animal Crossing City Folk is a lot like Wild World in many ways, many of which we will go over. But first, let me set the stage. The year is 2006. You are Nintendo, famous creator of family-friendly first-party titles. Unlike when the GameCube was a current-gen console, this time around, Nintendo was no longer underperforming. In fact, their latest handheld, the Nintendo DS, was starting to pick up steam, and they had just released the Nintendo Wii, another console on top of the already successful Nintendo DS, poised to print money. The Wii was released in North America on November 19th, 2006, and featured motion controls as one of its main selling points. In fact, it was one of the first successful home video game consoles to feature motion sensing controls, using the Wii Remote and the nunchuck to allow players to physically swing, wave, and whatever this is, their way through games. The console was met with widespread commercial success and became a popular choice for both casual gamers and families alike that were looking to get their daily exercise in without having to leave the comfort of their living rooms. During this time, it was no exaggeration to say that everyone and their mom wanted a Wii. The Nintendo Wii sold over 101 million units worldwide, making it one of the best-selling home video game consoles of all time. In contrast, the Nintendo GameCube sold just over 21 million units worldwide. This difference in sales was massive and can be attributed to a number of factors, such as the Wii's innovative motion sensing controls, its wider appeal to both casual gamers and families, and a strong lineup of exclusive games. In fact, the Nintendo Wii did so well that it also outsold its successor, the Nintendo Wii U. But hey, that's a story for another time. But basically, after the mediocre performance of the GameCube, the Wii sold really fucking well. And despite the Wii's lackluster hardware compared to the competition, this was the first time in a long time that it really seemed like Nintendo was putting up a fight in the console wars. Seeing as this was the case, Nintendo decided to release a sequel for one of their most lucrative franchises, the Animal Crossing series, and work began around December of 2006, right after director Hisashi Nogami had wrapped up his work on the Mii channel for the Nintendo Wii. In early 2007, Nintendo announced an unnamed Animal Crossing title as one of the games that was planned for release on the Wii. However, this would never come to fruition that same year, and the online publication IGN speculated that the game would release sometime in 2008. Its development was mostly centered around ways in which the Animal Crossing team could incorporate the Wii's new technologies into their gameplay, such as using motion controls to help the player navigate menus and their town, or using the Wii Connect 24 feature to update the player on current happenings in their town or their friends' towns. After a nearly 2-year development lifecycle, Animal Crossing City Folk was released on November 16, 2008. Unlike previous Animal Crossing releases, it actually came out in America first this time, with Canada and Japan getting it on November 17, 2008 and November 20, 2008 respectively. Australia and Europe received the game in early December of 2008. Animal Crossing City Folk was the third Animal Crossing game released in the West, and the 5th overall game released in this franchise in Japan, for those who are keeping track. It was also the first game in the series to have different French and Spanish releases, depending on your region. Unlike Wild World, the localization changes for this release weren't that radical, partially because the series had already chosen a model of having one base game that all future games would be based on, rather than having to adapt a Japanese game for other regions. If anything, content was re-added back in, with holidays making a return, in addition to some, but not all villagers that were missing from Wild World. Ultimately, City Folk would end up selling a respectable 3.38 million copies worldwide. Not bad, but a far cry from the success of Wild World. So why was this? What gives? I thought this series was destined to become a global success. I think that a lot of the reason for the weaker sales of this entry boils down to two main things. First of all, City Folk was basically an updated version of Wild World, but on the Wii. And second of all, being on the Wii, City Folk loses a lot of the benefits of a portable console mentioned earlier, due to now being stuck on a home console. Because of these reasons, it felt less like a sequel and more like a lot of the same thing as Wild World, but with a fresh coat of paint. But before we can discuss it retrospectively, let's just go over the contents of the game. Like any other good Animal Crossing game, ours begins by talking to a familiar cat named Rover. For those who play the GameCube games, he gives us a short brief about living on our own, and we promptly hitch a ride into town from Captain, who has moved on from driving taxis to buses now. Make no mistake, Animal Crossing City Folk begins a lot like Wild World. It's another game in the Animal Crossing series, after all, and they all begin mostly the same way. But unlike previous installments, and future ones too, Wild World shares the same core with City Folk. By this, I mean that the two games essentially run on the same engine as far as looks go, except one is on the Wii, with its improved hardware. Both games have the same soundtrack, character designs, and overall appearance. In fact, when you first boot up Animal Crossing City Folk, it even asks you if you would like to transfer your old save file from Wild World. This is not exactly a bad thing, but I think it lends to the theory that a lot of people saw this entry as more of a companion game than a sequel. What is new, however, is good, for the most part. Let's begin with the main new feature added to City Folk, the city. The city is not that big, but it is relatively lively. The city serves as a hub of new shopping facilities added to Animal Crossing City Folk. You can go here at pretty much any time, but not all shops are open at all hours. In fact, the only one that does open 24/7 is the auction house. Random villagers can be seen popping in and out here, and sometimes it can be cool to see your favorite villager just hanging out. Sadly, as far as I know, there is no way to ask them to move into your town. Believe me, I've tried. Going from left to right, we have Crazy Reds, which is a black market where Red scams the absolute shit out of you. You need an invitation from a random villager in your town to enter here, and it is the only way to get paintings in order to fill up your museum. Then, there's the Marquee, a theater where you can see performances by Dr. Shrunk and a new character, Frillard. These performances teach the player an emotion, and you can store a grand total of 4, so make them count. However, seeing Frillard is a rare occurrence because he only shows up for 6 of the possible emotion performances. Up next is the Happy Home Academy, which is run by Lyle the Otter. Lyle has been fired from his previous job of scamming people by means of insurance fraud, and he now works for the Happy Home Academy. They sneak into your house and judge you based on how you decorate your house. So, from one scummy job to another. To the right of that is Gracie Grace. Gracie the Giraffe has opened up a shop in the city and has even hired LaBelle, a fancy hedgehog, to run the shop. LaBelle, also known as, spoilers for a game that is over 14 years old, Label, is a long-lost sister of Sable and Mabel. You can buy only the finest of furniture and clothing at Gracie Grace. Then we have the auction house, which is run by Lloyd the Gyroid, who would end up becoming a staple of this franchise. But in this game, he just runs the auction house, which uses the, say it with me, now defunct Nintendo Wi-Fi connection service, which was discontinued back in May of 2014. Directly outside, and to the right of the auction house, is Kix. Kix is a skunk that gives you a shoe shine for 500 bells, which was the only way to change the appearance of your shoes in the series, up until that point. Below Kix is Shampoodle, which is where Harry the Poodle will give you a haircut or a makeover, which is an option that gives the player the ability to use a Mii's face as a mask for your character. In my opinion, it looks out of place, because the style of Mii's clearly clashes with that of most characters in Animal Crossing. Animal Crossing characters are round and cutesy, and Mii's are, while simple, comparatively more realistic looking. It's just a little unsettling, really. Last but not least of the stores is the Fortune Shop, which is where Katrina the Panther will tell you your fortune, which can help you find bad luck. In addition, on certain days, Phineas the Sea Lion will show up in the plaza to give out fun items such as balloons and pinwheels. Lastly, while not technically a shop, the Reset Surveillance Center can also be visited on certain random days after 8 p.m. when it is not blocked off by traffic cones. Here, the player will see either Mr. Resetti or Don Resetti surveilling the town. This is also the first time it appears in the Western release, as the first time it was accessible was in the Japanese-only Animal Forest C+. And that's the city. The cool thing about the city is that it took a lot of daily events and put them all in one central location that is open during most of the day. Before, you had to log into your game and check your town daily, hoping you would get a specific NPC, such as Gracie Grace or Red. And now, they're just there, in the city. And that's pretty much the biggest change in this entry. But there were a lot of new changes made and small improvements here and there. So, now seems like a good a time as any to talk about them. As far as villagers go, Animal Crossing City Folk had a grand total of 210. Of those 210, 42 of them were villagers that had previously been cut from Wild World, such as Anka, who was previously part of the Islanders in Population Growing, and therefore not technically a villager, and 18 of them were new ones. However, there were still 146 villagers that were in previous entries that were not included in City Folk. Although a lot of fan favorites are back this time around, for some reason, in City Folk, villagers no longer give you their photos when you reach the highest level of friendship with them. This was a feature that was introduced in Wild World, and because City Folk is so heavily based on Wild World, it's kind of odd that they were removed. In addition, Animal Crossing City Folk changed the system for how villagers moved out. In City Folk, you can only get villagers to stay in your town after they have chosen to move out, by asking them not to move before they are already in boxes. This change makes sense to me, as before you could only ask them to stay while they were already in boxes, which by then meant that they already had all their possessions packed up and ready to go. Look, I'm not going to beat around the bush. The villager dialogue in City Folk feels weaker than that of previous entries in the series. A lot of the villagers in this game just feel like they are less rude or snarky. Soft. They feel soft, or at least softer than the ones in Wild World and Population Growing, and as a result, they feel less interesting overall. However, this was likely an unintended consequence of dialogue being rewritten in an attempt to make the flow of conversation feel more natural. According to Nintendo, for City Folk, there is an emphasis placed on having the subject of a conversation change less frequently. As a result, conversations that would have previously moved around randomly now end rather shortly, as most topics that villagers can talk about have only 2 or 3 interactions before they don't want to talk to you anymore. Because they have nothing new to say to you after a certain point, you will end up with less meaningful conversations that could have led to you earning money, or potentially getting a gift. Ultimately, this means that villagers are not a reliable source of income in this game when compared to previous entries, such as Wild World. Pair this with the fact that the city is prohibitively expensive, and some of the newer content and items can become a downright pain in the ass to grind for. That is, unless you are ready to spend a long time fishing and catching bugs to earn money, without the use of any passcodes, like in population growing, or the aid of villagers, like in Wild World. Another one of the biggest complaints about this game was that grass in your town would deteriorate really fast. In an Iwata Asks interview, it was stated that this change was made in order for towns to have more natural paths. The logic behind this idea was that players would naturally gravitate towards walking in the same areas to get to their destinations in the same way, leading to unique paths that would make sense and be tailored to the player's needs. In actuality, not many people walk like this, and a lot of towns ended up becoming barren landscapes full of dirt paths that made not a lot of logical or aesthetic sense. In addition, in City Folk, Resetti resets your save file. Apparently, this only happened in the European release of this game, and apparently was also just a rumor. There was at one point a seemingly fake video that some user created and posted on the Beltree forums, an Animal Crossing forum board that has been around since at least 2010, but it has since been removed, leading me to believe that this rumor was just that, a rumor. I want this to serve as a reminder that you shouldn't just trust everything you see on the internet, or spread it around, even if it is a fun rumor. As far as new characters go, City Folk introduced Nat, a chameleon that hosts the Bug-Off, Pave, a peacock that celebrates Festival by giving you exclusive furniture, and Serena, a dog that serves as the goddess of the fountain inside of the player's town. Serena is the source of both the Golden Axe and the Silver Axe in this game. There was one more new character added to City Folk, and this character can only be described as a scourge upon society. That's right, I'm talking about the one, the only, Zipper T Bunny. This hopping harbinger comes to your Animal Crossing town each year to celebrate Bunny Day, this game's harebrained version of Easter. With a suspiciously human-like shape and suspiciously zipper-like feature on his back, Zipper T Bunny brings with him a whirlwind of egg hunts and pastel-colored mayhem that makes even the most seasoned of Animal Crossing players question their sanity and what it truly means to be human in a world full of anthropomorphic talking animals. While some argue that he's merely a misunderstood mascot, others insist that he's a sinister entity, hell-bent on drowning the world in a sea of eggs. And others go so far as to insist that he's actually the reincarnation of Jesus. So, next time Bunny Day rolls around, put on your tinfoil hats. And remember, the eggs are watching. While Welcome to Animal Crossing City Folk was generally seen as a successful release, it was not without its fair share of controversy. We haven't even talked about the incident yet. When review copies of City Folk were sent out in 2008, copies of Wild World were sent out as well in order to show off the DS functionality that let you transfer your town over to City Folk. However, it was reported that one of the villagers on a Kotaku and MTV journalists' review copies of the game had the N-word as their catchphrase. Nintendo issued an apology and recalled the copies without giving much explanation as to how this catchphrase snuck itself in. There are a couple of theories as to how this happened, but ultimately, at some point, someone, possibly a person employed at Nintendo, or even a friend of that person, had to have given Barbara this catchphrase. And from there, Nintendo sent out the review copy, which now had the slur in it, without checking the catchphrases that were on the games. This is by far one of the most controversial moments of the Animal Crossing series, and these days, not a lot of other information is known about it, likely due to the sensitive nature of this event. You know what? I feel like this has gotten kinda negative lately, but I promise there were improvements made in this game. For example, City Folk added 8 new fish and 8 new bugs over Wild World, and the Animal Crossing team removed the need to connect to someone else's town in order to unlock the final upgrade of Tom Nook's store, Nookingtons. In fact, an option was added where you could actually downgrade Tom Nook's shop back to the previous one, if you wanted to. Tom Nook will ask you, what would you like to see in a store? And depending on the answer you give him, he will downgrade your store. But don't worry, this option isn't permanent, and he will ask you again in 22 days. As for why you would want to downgrade your store, Nook and Go remains open until 1 AM, while Nookingtons closes at 9 PM. So, choosing to downgrade could benefit night owls, or people who play the game later at night. Another noticeable difference between this game and Wild World is that the house in Wild World was actually bigger than the one in City Folk. The houses in City Folk have 164 squares of floor space, while the ones in Wild World have 208 squares of floor space. But you need to remember that in Wild World, that house was shared between all the people that lived in that town, which meant that if you had 4 save files, you all had to share one house. Whereas in City Folk, each player now gets their own house. In addition, players could now decorate their basements, which was a first for this series. For City Folk, holidays have returned. This means that you can now celebrate the real world holidays in both your game and real life, thanks to the return of lovely holidays, such as not Christmas and not Halloween. This game also introduced pro designs for the custom clothing designs that you could create for your villager to wear or display for other town residents to try. Pro designs feature the ability to have a different design of the front, back, or sleeves of your design, and they could be applied to long sleeve and short sleeve shirts and dresses, as well as hats. As far as tools go, City Folk retains the same tools as in Wild World, with the addition of a shopping cart. The shopping cart acted as a debit card, allowing the players to draw funds from their bank account without needing to have the bells on them. Sadly, it was only usable at the auction house, because prices for auctions could get rather high, and at Gracie Grace, because the items they sell there are fucking expensive. The card comes in a basic tier, which is given to the player by mail the next day after depositing 10,000 bells into an ABD machine, and a golden tier, which was the same thing, but offered a 20% discount when used to purchase items. You could lose these items, but don't. If you lose the basic card, a new one can be sent to you if you ask for a replacement from the ABD machine. But if you lose the golden card, you're shit out of luck. You don't get a new one. Golden cards don't just grow on trees. That'd be stupid. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a money tree to go chop down. And that's basically Animal Crossing City Folk. When it comes to visuals, these two games are mostly the same. That is to say, City Folk is not much of an upgrade over Wild World in terms of style, and neither is Wild World over population growing, or population growing over Animal Forest, for that matter. But in terms of raw fidelity, City Folk looks like a polished version of Wild World, and is more in line with the GameCube release in terms of console quality visuals, which makes sense, since people often joke that the Wii is just 2 GameCubes duct taped together. It's still the same old Animal Crossing everyone has come to love. The humans have big round eyes and heads, triangle-shaped noses, no eyebrows, and animals that wear clothes. Well, most of them. And for a game like this, that's just fine. If you've been paying attention to how the world looks in both of these games, you might have noticed that the angles of most things look odd when you move past them. This is because, in Animal Crossing Wild World, the map used is based on a cylindrical projection, whereas in Population Growing, as well as all games based on the engine of the first Animal Forest game for the Nintendo 64, the world uses a grid-based system. Objectively, this makes the movement of the overworld feel smoother when compared to the originals, where moving between acres felt reminiscent of the first Legend of Zelda game. In my opinion, this small detail always stood out to me as textbook Animal Crossing. When I think of Animal Crossing, the rolling cylinder style world is one of the first things that comes to mind. And it's been in this series ever since Wild World. Really, it's part of the whole look at this point. The cutesy visuals, art direction, and the rolling world all culminate to create an experience that is remarkably Animal Crossing. It does make for some weird implications about how this world is laid out, if you think too hard about it though. Fuck. As far as performance goes, Wild World runs at a solid 20 FPS on the Nintendo DS. Not good, because City Folk and Population Growing ran at 60 FPS. But not bad, when you consider that all of this was crammed to just 32 megabytes. While we're at it, I think it's a little interesting that when you look at the E3 trailer for Animal Crossing Wild World, you can see that it more closely resembled the GameCube release back then. The characters even had those wonderful hats that you couldn't take off. If Wild World runs at 20 FPS, I don't even want to imagine the sheer slideshow that this higher fidelity Animal Crossing Wild World could have been. Last but not least, let's go over some Animal Crossing commercials. You know, for fun. For Wild World, America chose to go with a campaign featuring humans of realistic animal heads, just living their lives as if this was normal, while the UK and most European and even Asian countries had a dubbed variation of a commercial featuring a girl in the same gameplay, while the narrator just talks about things you can do in Animal Crossing. Say what you will about marketing, but this here is art. I'm a sucker for weird and bizarre commercials. Nintendo of America definitely knew what they were doing back in the day. For City Folk, America got a boring regular commercial featuring the We Speak, while Europe chose to do more of the dubbing for local regions, with the same footage used for each country. Meanwhile, Japan and Korea got different commercials, which are basically the same thing as what America got, where they just showed off gameplay and the We Speak. As well as having similar visuals, Wild World and City Folk have almost exactly the same soundtrack. It's a good soundtrack though, I'll give it that. The main difference between these two games is that the music of City Folk sounds more crisp, clear, and overall more full, thanks to the Wii's improved sound processing capabilities over the DS. This can be heard most clearly on tracks such as the 1AM hourly theme, where the difference in the quality of the guitar instrument is noticeable. A lot of it makes for great background music. In fact, I feel like lately, I've seen an influx of YouTubers using the soundtrack of older Animal Crossing games as background music for their gaming videos, and it's perfect for adding some charm or whimsy to any video. And while I'm sure they use both, I've mainly heard music from Animal Crossing Population Growing as a selection of choice for any aspiring YouTuber. Despite this, perhaps it's because City Folk is my first game and because Super Smash Bros. Brawl was my first exposure to this franchise, which is the music of Wild World. But I mainly associate the modern depiction of Animal Crossing with the soundtrack of these two games. The whole soundtrack slaps, but like, in an understated way. There's nothing extravagant or amazing going on here, and that's alright. It doesn't have to be. Most of the hourly songs stay out of your way, till you find that one hourly song that just happens to get stuck in your head. The soundtrack makes you feel good, that's all there really is to it, and it's hard to describe in words. So, I will now attempt to describe it in words. The soundtrack of these two games has a unique quality to it that can best be described as a drum machine awkwardly marching along to a steady, yet unpredictable melody. The hourly music is repetitive because of the sudden short notes and the constant drums, which usually have the same beat, just at different BPMs. Yet, it's still incredibly charming. You can really feel the rhythm of the soundtrack, especially the drums, which serve as the glue for every hourly tune as it beats along in the background of the game. It's one of those things that just sticks with you. When comparing these games, City Folk and Wild World have a more relaxing soundtrack overall. The songs retain that empty and not overly stated charm that the previous games had, especially the hourly music. You still got your beeps and boops and your kicks and snares. There is, however, a distinct lack of cat sounds in the hourly music of this one, sadly. You gotta play the first game if you want that. Ultimately, City Folk's music is less adventurous compared to the originals, both in choice of instrumentation and composition. Overall, I would say it has the same feeling as the GameCube game's music, but it's a bit less goofy, if that makes sense. Though, in the end, you could take the music from this game and tell me it was the music of Population Growing, and I'd believe you. In fact, I listened to the City Folk soundtrack with headphones on while writing the script for this video, and at one point, I switched over to Animal Crossing Population Growing's music, and I remember thinking, man, City Folk's hourly music sounds really close to the first game's. For Wild World, credit for composition mostly goes to Kazumi Totaka, who served as both sound director and composer, and Asuka Hayazaki, who was credited simply as sound assist. There are about 60 to 70 new songs in Wild World, most of which were produced by Totaka. For City Folk, Totaka returns as sound director, along with the help of Manaka Kataoka as a composer for the marquee, as well as other buildings in the city, and Shiho Fuji, who helped compose Kekkei Slander's songs and arrange the different variations of hourly music. During an interview with Nintendo, Totaka revealed that he had a unique vision for the soundtrack of Wild World. He aimed to create a score that blended seamlessly into the background, rather than being an intrusive one. I think it's safe to say that he accomplished that goal with flying colors. Speaking of Totaka, everyone's favorite naked talking dog based on him is back, and he goes from playing a total of 55 songs in the original to 70 in Wild World, with 5 more added on top of that in City Folk. And finally, to wrap up the topic of sound design as a whole, to this day, Animal Crossing Wild World is the only game in the entire series to use random syllables for animalese, instead of using sped up voice synthesis. This would later be fixed with City Folk, though. Animal Crossing Wild World and City Folk both received mostly good reviews from various video game publications, with City Folk earning a lower Metacritic score than both Wild World and Population Growing. Most criticisms of Wild World were against the use of friend codes and the limited features available in multiplayer, while most of the criticism around City Folk was that it didn't add a whole lot to the Animal Crossing formula. In fact, GameSpot even awarded it the least improved sequel of the year award. Ouch. Let's address the elephant in the room. Why did Wild World sell better? For starters, I think City Folk suffered from Nintendo feeling compelled to use the motion controls of the Wii Remote. Personally, I feel like controlling the game with a Wii Remote was a bit of a chore. Sometimes I just want to sit back, unwind, and cross some animals, and having to point the Wii Remote at the screen for basic functionality is annoying. Comparatively, using the DS stylus to do things like moving around or typing letters feels so much easier to use. You don't have to use your whole arm. You can just use your hands and slide the DS stylus out of its slot whenever the need arises. Well, you know what? Fuck it. You could even just use your finger. As for the Wii, it did have one thing going for it, and that was that it had USB ports. They allowed you to use the infamous Wii Speak functionality, which featured the sound quality of a McDonald's drive-thru order microphone, and suffered from the feedback of the television you were playing on, since it was designed to be near it. You could even plug in a USB keyboard into the Wii, in order to not have to point the Wii remote at the screen to type letters. You could plug in a USB keyboard into this thing, but are you really going to? Also, the portability of the DS can't be overlooked, not to mention all of the revisions it got, especially the DS Lite, which was released prior to both the launch of the Wii and that of City Folk, at least in Japan. While it is nice to play the Animal Crossing games in a handheld, I think that there is something about playing the games in the series on a big screen that just hits differently. To me, it feels more like I'm allowed time to just sit down and unwind, rather than sneaking in a gaming session or a portable console. But I have been in places in my life where I would have preferred one method over the other, so I can see the appeal of both sides. That being said, going by modern standards, I feel like both of these games could benefit from a control overhaul. There's so much needing to go through menus to do just one thing. That would have just been one button in the latest game in the series. Or hell, even in the very next game in the series. When comparing City Folk to Wild World, it's important to remember that City Folk was created mainly to show off the wireless capabilities of the Nintendo Wii. Sadly, this was during a time where not everyone had access to easily available home Wi-Fi. In fact, it wasn't until 2012 that 25% of all homes worldwide would receive Wi-Fi at home. During 2008, I can personally remember having to go out and buy the official Nintendo Wi-Fi connection adapter because our router didn't support Nintendo Wi-Fi connection. In addition, fewer people bought this game when compared to Wild World, leading me to believe that most players chose to stay on Wild World, which already had Nintendo Wi-Fi connection capabilities. Although, the things you could do if other players were lacking due to the hardware limitations of the Nintendo DS. For example, if you invited someone over to your town in Wild World, you couldn't visit KK Slider, but you could in City Folk. While I don't think this next point had a very big impact on sales, if at all, personally, I found the dialogue in City Folk to be disappointing when looking at it in retrospective. Like I said earlier, I prefer to have a more confrontational relationship with villagers before earning their respect or affection, if at all. Simply put, I think that earning the affection of a grumpy villager should be earned, not given to the player. And villagers that are just happy pushover blobs are no fun. Rant aside, I think that either of these games would have made a fine entry point to this series back in the day, and they managed to stand alone without needing to rely on the other for full enjoyment. They are not devoid of wit or good writing, they just have less of it when compared to the first game, where villagers literally verbally assaulted you, and we loved it. In reality, I played City Folk first, then New Leaf, and then I decided to go back to play the older games in the series, after having been disappointed in the dialogue in New Leaf. And at the time, City Folk seemed to have a good amount of sass, but that was all relative. Knowing what the original games had for dialogue, I would much prefer that to the modern treatment that current Animal Crossing games give us. That being said, it's all about perspective. Some people online even refer to City Folk as the good old days, so go figure. If you were to play City Folk today, what you would play is not the best version of it. And by this, I mean that the ultimate City Folk experience was perhaps back during the late 2000s and early 2010s. You know, when the game came out, there was more stuff to do back then, when you had the option to interact with others through the official Nintendo Wi-Fi connection service, and it made you less reliant on your villagers for money and entertainment. But not all is bad, as nowadays services exist that help you play with others using fan-hosted Nintendo Wi-Fi connection servers. You'll just have to go out of your way to find people to play with. But you always had to do that anyway, due to the use of friend codes. I think it's important to remember that nowadays we might take the internet for granted. Well, it has been around for a while. During this time, the internet, and more specifically social media as we know it today, was just beginning to take off. In fact, by this point, the Animal Crossing franchise had begun to establish a sizable audience online. These games had a community of fans who were not only posting reviews, making let's plays, and writing blogs, but also talking with each other about their favorite villagers, sharing designs, and were looking for ways to connect with others, whether by social media or through the online features of these games. Overall, this is a good time to be a Nintendo fan. The DS was selling like hotcakes. Is that even a phrase people say? Yeah, no, people, it's even a fucking article. And during those early years, everyone and their mom wanted a Wii. It was the Nintendo was back of times, ultimately. I think that with the exception of a few control quirks, these games still hold up today and are a refreshing take on the Animal Crossing formula. If you're sick of modern day Animal Crossing games, they are games you could play until the end of time, or at least until 2035. Because for some reason, in City Folk, the clock was not made to support dates after 2035, whereas Wild World goes up to 2099. And if you're as curious as me, population growing goes up to 2030. And who knows? If we live that long, like as a species, you can catch me on Wild World in 2099. And if that, dear viewer, leave you with one question. Did we really just discover Animal Crossing City Folk? Or have we been playing it for years? Hey, if you made it this far, thank you. It means a lot. You didn't have to watch this whole thing, but you did. Or you just skipped to the end, which is like, what are you doing? Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Don't forget to leave a like and subscribe. It fucking helps me. Every little bit helps for real. More videos coming out soon. Mario Sunshine is up next. I fucking love that game. Also, I need to stop swearing for the algorithm, but yeah, I'm not going to, so yeah. See ya.